Hey guys, tonight we slip back in time to a place where the sky stays gray, the sea never shuts up, and the highlight of your week is not dying of mildew. Welcome to a tiny Viking coastal village somewhere near the edge of nowhere, where you, yes you, are the candle maker. You rise with the damp fog curling over your roof of moss and driftwood, and your fingers are already sore. By the way, you probably won't survive this life. Between frostbite, boredom, and neighbors who think hygiene is witchcraft, the odds aren't in your favor. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you're listening from and what time it is there. I like knowing who's drifting off where. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The wind rattles your door before you even open your eyes. It always does, like the gods are brushing their teeth with sleet. The fire's out, of course it is. The coals sulk in the hearth, damp and gray, just like the rest of the room. You grope for the flint. It takes 4 miserable tries to get a spark going, and by then your fingers feel like twigs left outside too long. Welcome to another day in the life. Your house is small. Cozy, some might say, if they enjoy low ceilings, persistent drafts, and sleeping next to your own tools. You live alone, but not for any romantic or tragic reason. It's just that very few people want to spend their lives around the smell of boiled whale fat, because that's your specialty. Not wax, not bees. Whale fat? Your cousin tried candle making with seals once. He died. The smell lingered for months. You grab yesterday's leftover wick string, linen thread you braided yourself because no one sells anything so boring, and head outside to your workshop, which is really just a shed that lost its walls sometime last winter. It's cold. You sneeze. Twice. Out here, your tools are lined up on a battered bench, molds made from carved horn, tallow stored in clay pots. The whale fat stinks even when it's frozen. A great slab of it sits waiting, accusing you with its pale lumpiness. It smells like the sea gave up. You set the slab into the hanging pot above your fire pit. It takes forever to melt, and you have nothing to do in the meantime, except stare out across the wet, lumpy hills and maybe consider whether or not your ancestors would be proud of this moment. Probably not. They were warriors or traders or shipbuilders. You're the guy who gets excited about wick tension. The fat finally softens into its shiny, sticky liquid state, which is, if you're wondering, exactly as foul as it sounds. You stir it with a stick that used to be part of a spoon. The smell makes your eyes water. But the color's right. Pale yellow, almost noble. There's a rhythm to this, a kind of soft meditation. You dip the wick, lift it out, hang it, let it cool. Dip again. Each candle takes dozens of layers. You hum while you work. Nothing catchy. Just a dull chant to keep the wolves of thought at bay. Once, you tried singing. The sheep broke through the fence and fled down the hill. Historians still argue whether Viking settlements had designated candle makers, or whether it was more of a shared chore passed around by the least lucky member of the family. But in your case, the role chose you. You were the only one patient enough not to throw the whole pot into the fjord when it smoked wrong. Your first candle of the day hangs like a limp banana. Not great, but you'll trim it, carve it, make it decent. You always do. There's a soft noise behind you. A kind of snort. You glance back. It's the neighbor's goat again, chewing on your woodpile like it's his side gig. You throw a pebble. He stares, unimpressed. As the fat thickens, you move to a second batch. This one's from a narwhal. It smells worse. Also, it might be cursed. You light a corner of dried moss as a token offering to Njord, sea god, and occasional prankster. You wrap the finished candles in coarse linen. Each is the size of a baby's arm and weighs about the same. You'll take them to the market tomorrow. Or the next day. Depends how much you care. Your fingers are coated in greasy film, and you wipe them absently on your tunic. That tunic used to be blue. It is now a shade best described as wet disappointment. A passing bird poops on your roof. Again, still there's a kind of pride in this mess. You know the flicker of your candles lights the feast hall, the temple. Even the Jarls study. They don't know your name. But your hands have touched their light. That's something. Some say candle makers were part of sacred rituals. That they whispered to the flames and read the flickers like runes. You've tried. Mostly, it just looks like your candles are nervous. You sit for a moment, watching the last bit of tallow melt down. The sky hasn't changed. It probably won't. But the pot gurgles contentedly, and the candle you just made isn't bad. Straight. Smooth, almost noble. You'll call it Evening No. 6, not because you made 5 better ones, just because it sounds professional. The goat knocks over a log and trots off like he owns the place. You sigh, pick up your bundle of half-dried candles, and head inside. Your feet squelch in the mud. The wind hits your face like a cold slap from an ant you didn't greet properly. Home again. The hearth grumbles. The smoke doesn't go up the chimney so much as sideways. You sit near the embers, lay out your tools for tomorrow, and eat a small piece of dry bread that was last soft sometime last week. Outside, the sky darkens. Or maybe it doesn't. It's hard to tell here. Still, you made something today. Something small, flickering, and quietly defiant. A little light in a place that rarely asks for it. You lean back and close your eyes. Just for a minute. You wake up still sitting by the hearth, your neck at a heroic angle that suggests either deep thought or slow disintegration. The coals have gone cold. Again. And your knee pops when you stand. Outside, it's technically morning, though the concept is mostly theoretical here. The sky is a milky gray, thick with damp, and the low promise of drizzle. You wrap yourself in your extra tunic, which smells faintly of rancid oil and regret, and shuffle outside to start the day. Your breath puffs visibly as you cross to the shed. The ground squishes underfoot, soaked from last night's nothing rain. Everything here is always a little bit wet, even the memories. You glance at the whale fat barrels stacked near the wall, and they seem to glare back. Don't worry, you'll get to them. But first, your morning ritual. One long, slow candle, just to ease into things. It's your version of coffee, minus the warmth, taste, or joy. You select a wick, already cut and soaked in brine. The molds are chilly to the touch. Your fingers feel like pickled sticks as you tie the first loop. The tallow from yesterday is semi-solid, so you set it to warm again, kneeling to coax the fire alive. The flint is dull, probably jealous of your ambition. A spark, a curl of smoke. The fire begins its reluctant cough into existence. You hear a faint caw. A raven watches you from the rooftop, blinking in that slow, knowing way that suggests it's judging you. You nod back, because frankly, you've got nothing to hide anymore. As the fat softens and melts into its swampy puddle of usefulness, you prepare your dipping rod. This one's carved with notches, each one a failed attempt at something more interesting than candle making. Your first sword. Nope. Your attempt at a flute, absolute disaster. You begin the dipping. The first few passes barely count, the wick soaking in and out like a child testing cold bathwater. But soon the layers begin to build. Slow, meditative, predictable. You hum a tuneless rhythm, the same one you always hum, which might be a chant from your childhood, or just the sound your brain makes when it's bored, but not sad. Historians still argue whether early Norse candle makers relied exclusively on animal fats, or if occasional imports, like beeswax, made it into northern markets. You've never even seen beeswax. Supposedly, it smells like flowers. You wouldn't know. As your morning candle takes shape, you look up toward the hills. Smoke curls lazily from your nearest neighbor's home. A widow who owns more chickens than social skills. She sometimes sends eggs your way in exchange for candles, especially during the endless winter nights. The candle grows. Smooth. Centered. Slightly crooked, like your spine. You think about breakfast. You still have a bit of dried fish, hard as stone, salty as gossip, and maybe a crust of rye if the rats didn't beat you to it. You'll soak it in warm water if you want to pretend it's soup. You finish the candle. It's stubby and a little lumpen, but there's something lovable about it. You name it Stoic Larry. You set Larry on the bench and move to your next batch. A breeze rolls in from the fjord, carrying the wet slap of sea air. You smell salt, rotting kelp, and distant wood smoke. It's almost poetic if you breathe through your mouth. Today you plan to produce 12 candles. That's ambitious, but doable if the weather stays indifferent and the goat doesn't return. The good molds are slightly cracked, but still reliable, and you've memorized exactly how long it takes for each layer to dry. You stagger the dipping process across multiple batches. An art, really, though no one treats it like one. In between dips, you carve tiny patterns into yesterday's batch. It's not required, but it's your signature move. Swirling lines in half, runes that don't really mean anything, but look mysterious enough to be respected. Once, someone asked if it was protection magic. You nodded solemn. Let them believe. You pause to stretch your back. The sky drizzles half-heartedly. You glance up and mutter a prayer to Freyr. Not for good harvest or anything grand. Just for fewer Bakachis. A distant horn blows. It's the Jarl's household calling in the livestock, or warning that someone's pig has broken containment again. You ignore it. Not your circus. Not your pork. You keep dipping. Dip, dry, repeat. The air begins to smell like hot grease and effort. Your hands are sticky, the floor slick, and one of your sleeves is probably ruined. Doesn't matter. You have 3 more identical ones, in various states of ruin. You hum again. This time, something vaguely like a tune you once heard from a bard who came through town 4 winters ago. He traded a story for one of your candles, called it bartering up. You never saw him again. Quirky fact, in some Norse territories, candle size was used as a primitive timer during rituals. People would chant as a certain length burned down. If the candle melted unevenly, they blamed it on spirits, not shoddy craftsmanship. You, on the other hand, know better. Sometimes the wick just doesn't sit right. You finish another round of 6 candles. Not bad. They cool on a wooden rack by the wall, and you blow gently on each one like you're blessing them. Lunch is a hunk of smoked meat you stole from a festival last summer. You chew slowly, watching your breath fog the air in small puffs. It's quiet, except for the wind and the distant splash of a seal surfacing. Or maybe that's just a hallucination from the meat. Back to work. The last 4 candles of the day are the trickiest. You're experimenting with a new tallow ratio. Less narwhal, more sheep. Risky, but you're living on the edge. As the sun pretends to move across the sky, you realize you've spoken 0 words today. That's normal. It'll be days before anyone visits, and even then, it'll probably be about borrowing salt or complaining that your candlelight looks judgmental. You finish just as twilight seeps in. 12 candles, each weirdly dignified in its own way. You line them up and nod once. Not bad for a morning of wax before breakfast. Inside, you light one of your newest creations. It flares, flickers, and settles into a soft, steady glow. The smell? Still faintly like whale, but better. You sit beside it, watching shadows stretch across your little room. Not much changes here. But in your own quiet way, you've lit up part of the world. And if that doesn't count as magic, listen. You wake to the sound of someone arguing with a chicken. That's not a metaphor. Outside your window, really just a flap of hide that sort of pretends to be a window. Your neighbor's son is trying to coax a hen off your roof. Again, it's the same hen that once laid an egg in your boot. You never got a proper apology. You groan and roll over, but the floor is as cold and hard as your pillow, which is also a rock, so you sit up instead. There's a knock. 3 slow thuds and 1 frantic one. Your neighbor. You don't even open the door. You just grunt and toss a wrapped candle through the curtain. That's how transactions work around here. You stand. You stretch. You yawn with such violence that your jaw pops and your eyes water. It's another thrilling morning in your tiny Viking hamlet. And you smell fish. Specifically, fermented fish, that distinctive sour, sting scent that could stun a moose. The neighbors are brewing something again. Or pickling something. Or both. It's unclear. As you head outside to start your chores, the full bouquet of the village greets you: sheep, smoke, kelp, and failure. Each house seems to contribute a different note to the aroma symphony. One smells like boiled cabbage and regret. Another like wet dog and onions. Yours, of course, adds the subtle richness of burnt tallow. You nod to the blacksmith as he waddles past, belly first and wheezing. He smells like sweat and hot iron, which honestly makes him one of the more pleasant villagers. He grunts at you. Possibly a hello. Possibly indigestion. Historians still debate just how organized these small Viking villages were. Some argue there were clear roles and rules. Others believe it was more of a communal chaos model. Whoever had tools used them, and whoever had cheese was king. Based on your experience, it's the latter, definitely cheese-based governance. You pass by the cooper's hut, he's making barrels. Again, the man speaks exclusively in size, and once claimed he could identify tree species by the pitch of their creaks. You did not ask for this information. At the center of the village is the well. You nod at a woman drawing water. Her sleeves are soaked. Her scowl is permanent. She sells soap made of ash and mystery, and she doesn't like you. Something about your candles burning wrong. You think she's just jealous they don't explode anymore. A group of kids runs past, yelling in a language you think is mostly made up. One throws a pebble at a goat. The goat throws its entire body back. Children scatter. Justice is served. You finally make it to your storage hut. Technically not your hut, but no one else wants it. It's half sunken into the ground. Smells like peat bog and old mead. And maybe haunted by the ghost of someone who died very bored. But it holds your goods candles of various sizes, lumps, and personality types. You begin sorting the bundles for trade. The big ones go fast, used in the longhouses and temples. The small stubby ones are usually bartered by people who want just enough light to not step on their pets at night. Each one gets wrapped in cloth, labeled with a small scratch mark, your signature. You pause by a bundle with a strange dent. Looks like a bite mark. You do not investigate further. There's a sudden gust, and from behind you comes the smell of rotting fish again. Thicker this time. You gag. Not dramatically, just enough to feel like your organs briefly realigned. You walk past the fermentation shed, holding your breath. Inside, barrels bubble ominously. Some people think this stew of ancient herring is a delicacy. Others, like you, think it's a chemical weapon in disguise. You make a note to trade extra candles for bread this week. Maybe even berries, if the trader from downriver hasn't gone blind from his last sip of mushroom wine. And now, your neighbor approaches. He's barefoot, beard tangled with twigs, and dragging a sled filled with something. It's the skin, he says, grinning like a man who once stared at the sun and didn't blink. I found a fresh one. You know better than to ask what it's from. You nod. He asks for 6 candles. You offer 4. He insists 5. You both grunt and the deal is sealed. This is how economics works here: grunts, shrugs, and the occasional goat-based bribe. Quirky fact, some Viking villages used dried fish skins to wrap parcels or patch shoes. Supposedly, it was surprisingly supple. You can't verify that. You once used one as a bookmark, and the whole saga still smells like haddock. As you haul your goods back toward your house, you pass the seamstress's hut. She's hanging shirts made of wool so coarse, you're pretty sure it could remove bark. She nods politely but says nothing. She once tried to date the blacksmith. It did not go well. Back inside your home, you stack your sorted bundles in a corner, mutter a prayer to whichever minor deity handles candle safety, and wipe your hands on a cloth that used to be a curtain. The raven taps once on your roof. You ignore him. He's not your supervisor. Dinner is a small bowl of stew that might be meat, might be turnip, might be vengeance. It's edible, but only because you've burned off all sense of taste after years of inhaling boiling fat fumes. You light a candle, a squat one named Mildred, and settle beside the fire. The room glows warm, almost cozy. The smell? Still faintly like sea corpse, but you've stopped noticing. You think, briefly, about moving to a bigger village. Then you remember the story's taxes, expectations. Someone might make you host a feast. You'd have to smile. Speak, maybe even bathe more than quarterly. No thanks. You lean back against the wall, watching the flame flicker. Shadows dance across your bundled candles, each one a tiny lighthouse in your personal ocean of solitude. It's quiet, except for the occasional neighbor yelling at their goat, the distant plop of fish into barrels, and that one guy who insists on playing the jaw harp at bedtime. Still, this is your home. And even if it smells like fish and regret, it's your fish and regret. You're awake before the sun. Not that it makes much difference. The village sky is still an eternal gray soup, somewhere between fog and mood. You grope for your cloak in the dark, finding it by smell more than sight. Damp wool and tallow with a lingering note of goat. Today is market day, which means you have to act like a person who talks to other people. You're thrilled. You bundle your candles with practiced care. Each one is wrapped in linen scraps and tucked into a basket you wove yourself out of sheer boredom one winter. The bottom still sags slightly to the left, like your optimism. Once outside, the chill bites your face like a passive, aggressive aunt. You trudge down the muddy path toward the town square, boots squelching with every step. There's something poetic about it. You ignore that feeling immediately. Halfway there, your sled hits a rock and nearly flips. You right it with one hand and swear under your breath, which fogs out in a sad little cloud. Your candles jostle but survive. Probably. The market is already waking up. People bustle in that sluggish Viking way. Nobody hurries unless something is literally on fire. A pig trots past, squealing indignantly. A man yells after it with a sausage in one hand and a shoe in the other. So far, so typical. You find your usual spot between the lady who sells boiled moss and the man who sharpens things very slowly while making eye contact. Neither of them speaks much, which is perfect. You lay out your candles in rows by size. Feast, temple, everyday light, and the occasional Opes candle, which you pretend are artistic. Soon, people drift over. A fisherman buys 3 medium candles. Says he needs light for gutting cod at midnight. You nod solemnly, though you're thinking, maybe stop fishing at midnight. A child wants a candle shaped like a dragon. You offer him one that looks vaguely lumpy and suggest it's a sleeping dragon. He accepts this with awe. You might be a genius. Then comes the jarl steward. He has that face like he's constantly disappointed by everything, including the wind. He picks up a candle, sniffs it, sniffs again, and raises an eyebrow. This one's not centered. He mutters. You smile politely and say, "Neither is your face." Only in your head, of course. Out loud, you say, "They're handmade, sir." Each one has character. He buys 5 and stomps off, muttering about standards. Historians still argue how much social status tradesfolk held in Viking villages. Some records suggest craftspeople were essential and respected. Others imply they were tolerated only because no one else wanted to make things that smelled like flaming carcass. You sell more than usual today. Maybe people are stocking up for the long dark, or maybe your candles are finally catching on as rustic ambience. Either way, your basket gets lighter, and your coin pouch gains that satisfying little jingle. During a lull, you nibble a chunk of cold bread and watch a pair of teenagers hurl snowballs at a priest. The priest catches one and throws it back with shocking accuracy. You make a mental note to avoid him during confessions. You trade 2 candles for a hunk of dried apple. Real fruit. You haven't had real fruit since the great gooseberry heist of 3 summers ago. You eat it slowly, letting the sweetness linger. It tastes like joy and something your teeth weren't prepared for. Around noon, the wind shifts, and a new wave of village scent rolls in. Fermented something. You gag discreetly. Next to you, the knife sharpener hums a tune that sounds suspiciously like it involves dismemberment. The moss lady coughs into a bowl. You check your coin count and consider calling it a day. But then, someone new approaches. A traveler, boots too clean, cloak too nice, eyes too alert. She picks up one of your fancier candles, the one with the swirl pattern you did while tipsy. This is handmade. She asks, as if you might say, "No, I buy mine at Viking IKEA." You nod. Tallow and patience. She buys two, pays in silver, and smiles. A real smile. You feel deeply uncomfortable. Compliments make you itchy. You pack up mid-afternoon. The clouds have begun to spit sleet, and the knife sharpener is starting to whistle. That's your cue. As you pull your sled home, the wind pushes back hard. You lean into it, teeth clenched, shoulders hunched, doing your best impression of a determined sack of potatoes. You pass the stables. A horse snorts at you. You snort back. It feels like a conversation. At home, you unload your coin and tuck it under a floorboard no one knows about, except that one squirrel who keeps trying to chew through it. Dinner is soft cheese and barley. Not a feast, but you eat it by candlelight, which somehow makes it feel fancier. One of the candles from your batch burns lopsidedly beside you, dripping wax like it's sobbing. Quirky fact, in some Norse rituals, wax drips were interpreted as omens. Leftward drips meant good fortune. Rightward ones meant betrayal. Your candle is leaking in all directions. You choose to interpret that as variety. You settle in, tired but satisfied. The house glows warm. The sleet taps gently at the window flap. Like a polite burglar, you watch the flame wobble in the still air and allow yourself one soft smile. You didn't speak much today, but your candles did. They flickered in homes, lit meals, maybe even sparked one or two quiet conversations. That counts for something. And tomorrow you'll do it all again. Because the light doesn't make itself. The next morning creeps in without ceremony. A slow gray ooze that seeps through the cracks in your wall and lays itself like a damp cloth over your bones. You wake up to the familiar, slightly charred smell of yesterday's candle, now just a stub. It clings to the room like a lazy ghost. Your joints crack as you move. Each pop feels like a tiny betrayal from a body that really didn't sign up for this lifestyle. But you roll to your feet, pull on a woolen sock that's only mostly dry, and shuffle to the hearth. No coals left. Again. You sigh louder than necessary, in case the gods are listening. Fire starts eventually. After some whispered threats, and the ceremonial stabbing of kindling with a stick. You warm your hands and stare at the flickering flames. They dance in quiet sympathy, like they know your life isn't glamorous, and they respect your effort. You could do nothing today. That is technically an option. You could sit by the fire, poke at the floor with a spoon, and contemplate the tragic journey of that weird stain by the corner. But you don't. You have a job, a very specific, niche, greasy job. Candle making, after all, waits for no one. You head outside into the bracing cold that feels like a slap with a wet fish. The sky spits drizzle. The wind moans like a hungover bard. But your shed still stands. A miracle, really. It lost part of its roof last season, but you patched it with an old cloak and some stubbornness. Inside, you start prepping fat. Today's selection: mixed tallow from sheep and a suspiciously old lump of bear grease you got in a trade. Risky, yes. But maybe you'll invent a new scent, forest beast at dusk. Sure to be popular. You start melting the mix in your iron pot, which wobbles slightly from that one time you used it as a shield. The smell, let's just say it could evacuate a small barn. As it melts, you dip your wicks. The rhythm calms you. In, out, hang. In, out, hang. It's a tempo your brain has aligned with, like a heartbeat made of sadness and utility. A sheep bleats in the distance. Or maybe a neighbor. Hard to tell. The hours slide by. You create candle after candle, some long and noble, others short and awkward, all of them honest. You pause for lunch. It's cheese that sweats more than you do, and a crust of bread that could double as weaponry. You dunk it in hot water to soften it, and tell yourself it's soup. It isn't. But lying to yourself is a skill you've mastered. Sitting on a splintered stool, you look around your humble domain. Tools everywhere. Bits of wax, a pile of rejected wicks that tangled in anger. It's not much, but it's yours. You built this life wick by wick, flame by flame. Solitude, they say, builds character. You've got so much character you should be in a saga. Historians still argue whether the solitude of Norse tradespeople was intentional or simply unavoidable. Some believe it was revered, a path to inner strength. Others think it was the medieval equivalent of being ghosted by your whole village. You consider visiting someone just to remember how vowels sound when bounced off other people. But that thought passes like wind through a leaky roof. You're used to your own company. Besides, who would you visit? The blacksmith only talks about horseshoes. The soap woman hisses like a cat. And the last time you tried small talk with the baker, he threw flour at you. Back inside, you light one of today's candles. It burns strong and smells less like bear than you feared. You name it achievement. You sit by the hearth, carving a bit of leftover horn into something vaguely decorative. Maybe it'll be a comb. Maybe it'll be a very sharp spoon. You'll decide later. The shadows stretch. The fire crackles. You talk aloud, not to anyone, just to fill the space. You complain to the air about your sore wrist, discuss the weather with your stool, and insult the mold in the corner, which appears to be growing a beard. A knock at the door breaks the quiet. It's the blacksmith. He smells of iron and smoldering resentment. He steps in without waiting for a greeting, and immediately starts talking about his forge. You nod, and pretend to understand the nuances of bellows. He talks for 12 minutes straight, then asks to borrow 2 large candles. Got a late commission. He grumbles. Client wants mood lighting. You raise an eyebrow. For a sword? No, for a bathhouse. Of course. Viking priorities rating, feasting, bathing dramatically. You give him the candles. He promises to trade you some nails, or maybe a shoe. Or maybe he just mumbles and leaves. Hard to tell. You sit back down, slightly dazed. That was enough social contact for a week. Outside, twilight leaks into the sky like ink in cold water. You light another candle and watch its flame hold steady. It doesn't flicker. It doesn't complain. It just burns. Steady, quiet, like you. Quirky fact, some Viking homes used oil lamps made from carved stone or bone, filled with fish oil and moss. Candles, by contrast, were considered luxury items in some regions. So technically, you're an artisan. A greasy, underpaid artisan with a soft spot for fire. Dinner is a reheated lump of stew, and a small carrot that might be older than your boots. You eat by candlelight again. This one's achievements. Cousin. Mild satisfaction. You watch the shadows dance again. You wonder if anyone else is sitting by your candles tonight, eating their own questionable stew, thinking the same thoughts. Probably not, but it's a nice thought. Your elbow deep in lukewarm tallow when the blacksmith barges in again. No knock. Just the heavy thunk of the door scraping the floor, and his enormous frame squeezing into your already cramped candle hut like he's trying to wring out the air itself. He's panting, sweating, and, of course, carrying a small wooden box that smells vaguely like singed pine cones and regret. You don't say anything, just stare at him over your shoulder, one eyebrow raised, hand still sticky with animal fat. He holds up the box. I need a favor, he says. Of course he does. You wipe your hands on a rag that stopped being clean during the last lunar eclipse and gesture for him to sit. He doesn't. He paces instead, muttering about precision and presentation, and it's for the jarl, so no room for failure. Eventually, he opens the box. Inside, a strange metal stand, finely hammered into an intricate spiral, designed to hold exactly one candle. but not just any candle. A tall one, he says, nodding. Tall but narrow. Smooth. Elegant. No weird lumpy bits. You glance at your current batch, most of which resemble confused carrots. Elegant is not your default setting. He scratches his beard, leaving a streak of soot on his cheek. It's a centerpiece, he continues. For the Jarl's dinner table. He wants to impress someone. Someone important. Probably another Jarl, or a witch, or maybe just himself. You sigh loudly, but secretly you're intrigued. A challenge. A commission with prestige. A candle that won't just sit in a sheep shed, but will glow beside roasted meats and questionable political decisions. I'll need 2 days, you say, already eyeing your best molds. 1, he replies. You both know that's not realistic, but it's a Viking thing. Everything's a little bit a dare. Historians still debate how formalized the relationships were between craftspeople and the ruling class in Viking societies. Some argue artisans were integral to courtly life. Others say they were barely tolerated, called upon only when someone needed something fancy and no one else could be bothered. You agree with both? After the blacksmith leaves, you get to work. You choose your best fat, some rare, clean whale blubber from that one shipment before the sea froze your toes last winter. You melt it gently, whispering a few encouraging words to the pot. You also pick the straightest wick you've ever spun. It was meant for your wedding candle, a hypothetical project you started during an emotional low point last autumn. The process is intense. You dip slowly, layering with precision. No rush, no distractions. The first few dips are thin and fragile, like icicles trying to stand up straight. But the form starts to build, graceful, steady, almost beautiful. You squint at it. Is it working? A gust of wind slams into your shed. The candle sways. You grab it just in time, heart racing. You hiss at the window flap, mutter a few words in Old Norse you're not entirely sure are real, and press on. The candle grows taller, sleeker. You hold it up to the light. What little there is, and it casts a shadow worthy of poetry. Just then the door creaks again. It's not the blacksmith this time. It's the widow from the edge of town. She stands in the doorway, shawl pulled tight, eyes like steel. You got any of those little stubby ones? She asks. You nod, wordlessly hand her 2. She drops a pair of eggs into your hand without ceremony. One is still warm. Before leaving, she glances at your project. That for the Jarl. You nod. Looks too fancy to burn. Then she leaves. You turn back to the candle, and for a moment, worry she's right. Dinner is postponed tonight. You're too busy trimming the base, shaving off microscopic wax globs, whispering things like, be noble, and don't you dare lean left. The whole process feels like candle surgery. Quirky fact in some Viking regions, people carve their names or simple symbols into candles meant for rituals. An early signature or charm. You consider doing the same. Instead, you scratch a barely visible X near the base. If it tips during dinner, maybe it'll tip toward fate. Finally, it's done. Tall. Smooth. Balanced. You light it once to test. It burns clean. No sputtering, no stench. You name it, victory. You wrap it in cloth, gently place it in a padded crate, and set it by the door. The blacksmith arrives at dawn, surprisingly on time. He says nothing, just lifts the crate with a grunt and nods once. You nod back. After he leaves, the shed feels bigger, emptier, a little too quiet. So you light one of your stubby ones, just to fill the space. You watch the flame twitch. It doesn't know it's not the Jarl's centerpiece. It just burns, content to be useful. You feel that. It's just before dusk, and your feet are soaked again. Not from rain or a river mishap this time, but from a goat-related incident involving an overturned basin and your complete lack of reflexes. You squelch your way up the hill toward the village temple, a bundle of candles strapped to your back, and your pride trailing somewhere behind. The temple isn't grand. It's not a golden hall with dragon poles situation, more of a modest structure with driftwood beams and a roof that sheds as much light as it blocks. but it stands on sacred ground. Or at least, that's what everyone agrees on when they're sober. Tonight, you've been summoned to replace the altar candles. A ritual's coming up, one of the weirder ones. There will be chanting, maybe some interpretive axe dancing, and, of course, lots of fire. And guess who's responsible for making sure? None of it looks pathetic. That's right. The guy with sheep grease in his hair. The priest meets you at the door. She's tall, cloaked in fur, and has that expression people get when they've been breathing incense for too long. Her voice is low and always sounds like she's on the verge of revealing a secret. You kind of wish she wouldn't. Make sure they burn evenly, she says, gesturing at the stone altar like it insulted her grandmother. You nod. That's your job. You unpack the candles with the reverence they've somehow earned by being near gods. These aren't your regular lumpy market candles. These are the carefully carved, scratched ones. You even added spiral motifs and a few raised dots you claimed were for divine symmetry. Really, you just got carried away while bored. You place them one by one. They stand tall and straight in their holders. You light the first, and it flares up beautifully. No smoke. No gutter. Just that warm, golden hush. You glance sideways. The priest doesn't smile, but she exhales through her nose like someone mildly impressed. Around you, the temple is still. Moss creeps along the baseboards. A raven perches near the roof beam, watching you with ancient judgment. Or maybe he's just waiting for crumbs. As you light the second candle, something odd happens. The flame flickers, not in the normal way, but with a sort of lurch, like it's trying to speak. You freeze. The priest leans in. The gods accept your offering, she murmurs. You consider explaining that it's just a draft from the open window. Then you think better of it. Historians still argue whether the Norse gods were expected to literally inhabit ritual flames, or whether those ideas were metaphorical. Some sagas describe candles that sang, glowed blue, or danced in human-like patterns. You've seen exactly none of that, until now, maybe. The third candle lights without drama. The fourth, your best work, flares a little too brightly, then steadies. You step back. The altar looks, well, majestic. The priest begins her incantation. You're not allowed to leave until she's done. Something about candle purity or aura integrity, or maybe just loneliness. You sit quietly on a bench near the entrance. Cold stone, drafty corners, the smell of pine sap and wet wool. The temple's full of symbols you vaguely understand. Thor's hammer, Freyr's wheat sheaf, and some angry, looking carvings that might be warnings, or just very intense decorating choices. As the chants rise, you watch your candles. They glow strong, you feel weirdly proud. Then the goats arrive. Two of them, wearing what might be ceremonial collars, or just festive rope. They trot in like they own the place, bleating softly. The priest doesn't flinch. They're part of the ritual, she says. You whisper, are they symbolic? She shrugs. They're goats. The ritual continues. You half listen as she invokes the names of gods you wouldn't dare try to pronounce without breakfast. Odin, Njord, maybe a lesser known deity of turnips. You're not sure. Then comes the fire part. She circles the altar, swinging a censer that belches sweet, pungent smoke. Your candles burn steadily, casting shadows that crawl across the stone floor. They make the goat's horns look twice as long. The mood is eerie. Sacred. You almost believe something's happening. Not magic, exactly. But something ancient, something patient. And then the goat farts. Loudly. You stifle a laugh that threatens to blow out your nose. The priest doesn't react. You envy her discipline. Quirky fact. Goats were sometimes used in Norse rituals as sacrifices or symbols of fertility and strength. Or they were just there. Like now. No one really agrees. And this one just tried to eat the hem of your cloak. The chant ends. The priest extinguishes the incense and nods at you. The gods are pleased. You murmur, glad to help. She steps aside. You gather your tools and begin tidying up the wax strips like someone cleaning up after an overenthusiastic seance. As you work, she watches. You work alone always? She asks. You nod. That's a shame. You don't answer. You're not sure if she means it as sympathy or critique. Either way, it's accurate. You leave the temple with your box empty and your head full of smoke. Outside, the sky is trying to snow but can't quite commit. You walk home slowly, boots crunching on frost, bitten moss. Halfway back, you light a stubby candle just to see the path better. It flickers a bit, then steadies. Your own private torch, and as you pass the tree where villagers sometimes hang charms, you pause, pull a little wax twist from your pouch, and add it to the collection. Not because you believe it'll change anything, just because sometimes it's nice to leave something behind that glows. By the time you reach your front door, your boots are more ice than leather, and your hands have turned into two angry bricks of flesh. You fumble with the latch, swear softly into the wind, and finally shove your way inside, trailing bits of snow and existential wariness behind you. Inside, it's only marginally warmer. You light a candle, the last stubby one from last week's batch. It flares up reluctantly, casting uneven shadows on the low, wooden ceiling. The hearth is dead. The air smells like tallow, soot, and goat hair, which is weird, because you don't own a goat. Not anymore. Anyway. You warm your fingers near the candle, shifting side to side to avoid a drip of wax that's threatening your sleeve. As you sit back, trying to decide whether the lump in your cloak is a potato or a forgotten rock, something knocks against your door. Not a full knock, more like a polite bump. You open it, and there on the threshold lies a small bundle, tied in twine, wrapped in carved birch bark. You blink at it. No one is in sight, just the foggy dark, the vague outline of the seamstress's house, and what might be the raven perched on a snow-laced fence post. You bring the bundle inside, brush off the frost, and undo the twine. Inside a carved message stick, runes burned into its length, with the shaky precision of someone working from memory. You trace the marks slowly, eyes narrowing. It's from your cousin, the one who left for the fjords 10 winters ago. The one who swore he'd never come back after the great blubber fire. You didn't blame him. His message is short, oddly poetic, found light far from home, still cold. Missed the smoke. You stare at it for a long time. He sent no return address, no invitation. Just a thought, carved and sent across mountains and rivers by courier or kindness. You lean back and let out a breath that fogs the air in front of you. What does it mean? Does he want to reconnect? Is he dying? Was this just a sentimental driftwood moment? Like the time you tried to write a saga, but only made it 3 lines before getting distracted by a beetle. Historians still argue how common this form of communication was among scattered Viking families. Some suggest these carved message sticks were ritualistic, more symbolic than functional. Others believe they served as genuine letters, a kind of portable memory passed between kin and friends who lived on the edges of the known world. You tuck the stick into a corner shelf, right between the bone comb you never finished and a jar of pickled turnips you can't bring yourself to open. You'll reply. Eventually. Maybe. For now, you light another candle, this one tall, with a small crack along one side that makes it leak wax like a leaky boat. You've grown fond of it. It's unpredictable but committed. You settle in with some stale rye and the last of your smoked cheese. The candle throws a warm oval of light across your cluttered table. In the glow, you notice the soup pattern on the ceiling has started to resemble a long ship. That can't be a coincidence. Probably is. But it's comforting anyway. Outside, the wind shifts again. You hear voices, distant, drunken. The baker must be hosting another of his secret mead tastings. You weren't invited. You never are. But you're not entirely alone, are you? You have this message stick. Proof that someone, somewhere, thought of you while wrapped in sealskin and battling kelp monsters. Or whatever it is they do in the fjords. You pull out your carving knife and a bit of soft pine. Not to reply just yet, but maybe to start. You etch the first few runes, still burning. Not bright, but here. You'll finish the rest tomorrow, or the next day. Quirky fact. Some Norse villages believed that carved runes could hold a person's voice. Literally trap it like a spell. That when you read someone's message, a part of them stood beside you, whispering. You like that. It makes your cousin's words feel closer, less ghostly. As the candle burns lower, you top off your cup with warm water and a dash of honey you've been saving. A trader gave it to you in exchange for a candle shaped like a longboat. You thought he was joking. He wasn't. You sip, lean back, and let your eyelids droop. The wind rattles the wall. The raven taps once on the shutter, as if checking in. You mutter, "Still here?" And you are. The roof starts leaking again around midday, which is impressive considering it hasn't really stopped for 3 days straight. At first it was just a gentle drip above the shelf where you keep your extra wicks, but now it's moved down the ceiling beam like it's trying to find your spirit and extinguish it, one drop at a time. You try stuffing moss into the crack, a classic Viking technique for plugging leaks, and making the house smell even more like a wet sock. It helps, briefly, until the moss gives up, and becomes more of a sponge than a seal. You sigh so loudly the raven outside mimics you. It's getting better at that. Soon you'll have competition for village melancholy. The water drips into a wooden bowl now. Plink, plink, plink. Rhythmic, irritating. It starts to blend into your heartbeat. You consider composing a sea shanty about roof leaks, but your only instrument is a ladle, and it's still greasy from whale stew. You abandon the bowl and go outside, climbing onto the roof with a patch of old leather and a few nails you got from the blacksmith in exchange for a nightlight-shaped candle. The wind tries to blow you off twice, but you cling like a barnacle with trust issues. From up here, you can see the whole village, or at least what's not obscured by fog and regret. Thatched roofs, huddled smoke trails, a cluster of children pretending to be raiders, but mostly just yelling at puddles. You spot your neighbor trudging back from the fish shed, dragging a suspiciously heavy sack. He nods at you mid-roof. You nod back. No words. Just mutual respect between two people who know life's not glamorous and yet still show up for it. Historians still argue about the sophistication of Viking home repairs. Some sources suggest regular maintenance was a communal affair, while others paint a picture of hardy self-reliance. You can confidently say if it leaks, it's your problem. And your moss, the patch holds. You climb down with knees that now sound like a bowl of gravel being stirred. Back inside, you light a candle to test the mood. It flickers, but doesn't sputter. That's a win. Your floor is a battlefield of half-dried footprints and wax shavings. You sweep poorly. Somewhere beneath the grit is the actual floor you once cared about, but that was back when you thought things like order and beauty mattered in a world that constantly dumps rain on your dreams. You check your storage chest. 3 usable candles left, all from your cursed batch, so named because they each burned weird in a different way. One hisses. One weeps wax like it's mourning something. The third just smells faintly of onions. You wrap them anyway. People don't notice. Or if they do, they assume it's part of the rustic charm. Lunch is rye porridge. Again, you try to add flavor with a single berry you found behind a pot. Might be a beetle. You eat it anyway. You sit by the hearth watching smoke curl up the flue. It doesn't go straight. It spins like it's drunk. You like it. Feels like company. Then, thunder. Low and distant, it rumbles through the hills like a bored god dragging a chair. You flinch. Not because you fear lightning, but because thunder means roof leaks are about to become floor floods. You prepare. You stack your candle supplies on the high shelf. You check the muss. You place every bowl you own under the usual drip points. You even mutter a brief apology to the house, in case it's taking this personally. The storm comes in hard and sideways. Rain pelts your shutters. The roof holds, mostly. Only one new leak appears, in a surprising place, right above your sleeping mat. Of course, you drag it into the corner. You know the drill. Quirky fact, some Norse superstitions claimed a leaking roof was a sign of a house spirit being displeased. The solution: a gift of porridge left in the attic. You try this, even though your attic is more of a ceiling ledge, and the porridge is more of a salty mistake in a bowl. The leak slows. You choose to believe the spirit accepted your offering. Evening drags itself in, wet and whining. You light one of the cursed batch candles. It burns cleanly for the first time ever. Maybe the onion scent has faded. Maybe it just needed a little roof drama to awaken its purpose. You sip lukewarm broth and read your cousin's message stick again. Still cold. Still distant. Still somehow comforting. You scratch out another line of reply. Just a note about the roof and the candle. And how sometimes, even when everything's damp and moldy and vaguely falling apart, you still find moments of peace. The candle flickers. You close your eyes. The leak slows. The wind backs off. It's not perfect, but it's home. The sun creeps in, confused and apologetic, casting a pale glow through your fogged window flap as if to say, "Sorry for the mess yesterday." Outside, the puddles are freezing over, forming crusty rims around boots, barrels, and that one log you keep forgetting to move. You open your door and step out carefully. The ground crunches beneath you. Not the satisfying crunch of fresh snow, but the passive, aggressive kind where frozen mud fights your every step. It's midsummer, technically, which in your village means you have 2 more weeks of rain before the official snow starts. Today is festival prep day. Midsummer is when the whole village tries to act festive for about 5 hours before the mead runs out and someone's goat gets loose and eats the ceremonial bread. You've been assigned a crucial role. As always, candles for the feast hall. Big ones. Decorative ones. Ones that don't scream. I made these while crying over a broken spoon. You return inside and inspect your stock. Your most recent batch looks passable. A few are even symmetrical. You spend the next hour trimming bases, straightening wicks, and whispering minor threats at the ones that lean like suspicious travelers. The Jarl's assistant stops by to pick them up. He doesn't speak, just grunts and lifts the crate like it insulted his cousin. You thank him. He grunts again. You think that means goodbye. Historians still argue how structured Viking festivals were. Some sources suggest they followed strict rituals, seasonal rites, and symbolic offerings. Others believe they were glorified potlucks with more yelling. Your village leans heavily toward the latter. You pull on your best tunic. Still smells faintly of seal, but at least it doesn't have any visible patches. The one good thing about everyone smelling like fish is that fashion takes a back seat to nasal survival. At the feast hall, the tables are being set up by people shouting instructions that contradict each other. One says, "More salt." Another yells, "No fish!" Someone drops a large pot and curses the gods. The priest calmly arranges small statues along a shelf, ignoring the chaos entirely. You place your candles along the central table. They stand proudly, each one carved, twisted, and oiled until they shine just a little. You allow yourself one smug glance at the seamstress, who once said your candles made her eyes water. She pretends not to see you. Then comes the wait. You mill about outside as villagers gather. Kids run in circles, mostly chasing each other, sometimes being chased by goats. The sky lightens a shade, bright enough to make you squint, dim enough to feel suspicious. Finally, the horns sound. It's not a majestic blast, more of a soggy honk from a horn that's seen better centuries. But it gets the job done. The Jarl steps forward in his formal cloak, probably borrowed, says a few words, likely improvised, and waves everyone inside. The hall fills quickly. Roasted meats, boiled roots, pickled things that defy description, all spread across the tables in generous disarray. Someone brought cheese shaped like a serpent. You respect the effort. Your candles are lit. The hall glows. People murmur in appreciation. One even gestures at the candles and says, "Those don't smell bad." That's basically a standing ovation around here. You sit near the edge, content to watch. You don't mingle. It's not your skill. But you observe. The way the firelight dances off tankards. The soft laughter. The moment of silence when someone realizes they forgot to stir the stew and now it's burned. It's nice. Not exciting. Not story-worthy. But warm. Real. Quirky fact, some midsummer festivals included ritual matchmaking, where candles were floated on water, and the first pair to drift together meant the two people were fated. Your village skipped that part after the duck incident of 3 years ago. You eat slowly, roasted parsnips and bread with actual herbs in it. A luxury. Someone passes you a cup of mead. You nod your thanks. It tastes like fermented sunbeams and foot. As the evening settles, someone starts to sing. A slow, deep tune, more hum than melody. Others join in, no lyrics, just sound. It weaves between the flickering flames and clinks of mugs. You lean back, eyes on your candles. One flickers oddly. You frown. It leans toward the priest's statue. You hope that's symbolic of devotion and not another cursed batch moment. The night wears on. Stories are told. The jarl recites a saga with great enthusiasm and poor memory. A child falls asleep with his head in a bowl. A goat steals a roll and gets chased into the snow. Eventually, people drift out, murmuring goodbyes and making vague promises to visit each other more. You collect your candle stubs, wrap them in cloth, and return home. The sky is darker now, cold air creeping in like an old habit. At home, you light one more candle, one of the festival spares. It burns tall and clean, casting a golden ring on your table. You sit beside it, full but tired. Midsummer, halfway through the year, halfway through your stores of patience. But the candle glows, and for now that's enough. The next morning, everything is damp and slightly sticky. The feast hall scent clings to your clothes, smoked meat, spilled mid, and what might be someone's cologne made from boiled herbs and regret. You should wash, but you won't. Not today. You shuffle into your workshop, still woozy from festival mead and half-remembered stories about sea spirits and glow in the dark wolves. You light a test candle. It burns a little aggressively. Probably a metaphor. Then comes the knock. 3 sharp raps. Then silence. Not the blacksmith. Not your neighbor. This is the kind of knock that suggests someone has a request you're gonna hate. You open the door. It's the priest again. Same fur cloak, same incense-infused aura. She holds out a scroll made from flattened birch bark, sealed with a drop of red wax. You open it slowly. Read. Blink. Read again. The jarl wants a ceremonial candle for a naming rite. A big one. Special. Unique. And it needs to burn for exactly one night. No more, no less. You ask? Why me? She says, because the last one you made didn't explode. Fair point. You accept the commission. Mostly because saying no to a priest feels like a fast track to divine indigestion. You begin immediately. This candle must be tall, thick, perfectly balanced, and it needs to burn for roughly 6 hours. Not 5. Not 7. Exactly 6. Like the jarl's newborn is gonna time it or something. You measure out your finest tallow. The whale, fat blend from that. One particularly successful batch. The one that didn't smell like betrayal. You prep your tools. Heat the pot, say a small prayer to no one in particular. Then dip, and the candle. It refuses. First the wick won't hold. Then the tallow cools too fast. Then the mold cracks. You try again. This time the wax bubbles weirdly, like it's boiling secrets. You mutter threats. The candle mocks you, with each imperfect layer. Historians still argue about Viking rituals involving fire, whether candles were symbolic or precise instruments of timekeeping and magic. Some sagas mention candle curses, where a flame foretells fate. Others imply candles were mostly used to keep people from falling into fire pits. You dip again, slowly, carefully. It still doesn't work. You start over, this time using a new mold, still crooked, the wick frays. You throw a spoon across the room. It hits your door with the dull sound of defeated expectations. Outside, it starts to rain again. You step out for air. The village is quiet, soaking. A child walks past, holding a soggy roll and wearing a crown made of grass. He nods at you solemnly. You nod back. This is the most meaningful conversation you've had all day. Back inside, you try again. This time, you change the wick, twisting a triple, braided thread soaked in vinegar. Old trick. You stir the tallow slower, letting it cool just a bit before dipping. The mold is reinforced with twine. Your hands are steady, if slightly trembly from hunger and frustration. The candle starts to form, layer after layer. It thickens, smoothens. No bubbles, no cracks. You dare not name it yet. Lunch is forgotten. You chew some dried apple while watching wax harden. The light from the window hits the candle just right. It glows slightly. You trim the base. Shave off a little extra from one side. Whisper something vaguely poetic. You test, burn a sample wick from the same spool. Exactly 6 hours of burn time. You check again. Still 6. Maybe it's luck. Maybe the candle gods finally pitied you. Maybe it's just the vinegar. You wrap it in soft cloth and place it in a box lined with moss. You light a small companion candle. Hopeful backup. And carry both through the drizzle to the feast hall. The priest receives it without expression, just a nod. Will it burn right? She asks. You shrug. As long as no one breathes on it funny. She does not laugh. The ritual begins that evening. You don't attend. You sit at home, chewing jerky and staring at the sample wick as it burns its perfect 6-hour arc. You think about the candle that wouldn't burn, and how maybe it wasn't stubborn. Maybe it was just waiting. Quirky fact, some Old Norse texts suggest failed candles were sometimes buried near crossroads to dispel bad luck. You've never tried that. You just keep trying again. As the wick sputters its final breath, you exhale. The sample is gone. The candle lives its life far away, under someone else's roof, burning in service of a name you'll probably never hear. But its light came from you, and that's enough. The dog appears at dawn, covered in frost and mud, sniffing around your doorstep like it owns the place. You crack open the door, half asleep and full of skepticism, only to find it sitting perfectly still, tail thumping once, twice, as if to say, "This is happening. Accept it." You blink at it. It blinks back. And just like that, you've acquired a dog. It wanders in, sniffs your bed, then your boots, and finally your candle supplies. You watch it closely when it reaches the tallow crate. If it eats any, you're both going to have a very long night. You set a bowl of water by the fire and toss it a strip of dried meat. It wolfs it down with such enthusiasm that you briefly wonder if it's part wolf. Probably not. You decide to call it Bundle, since it arrived like a poorly wrapped delivery from the gods. And as if that weren't enough disruption for one morning, the bard shows up. Yes, the bard. He comes sloshing up the hill with a lute strapped to his back and a sack of belongings that smells like fermented turnip. You remember him from last summer. He tried to trade you a song about onions for a beeswax candle. You refused. He sang anyway. He grins as if you're old friends. Thought I'd winter here. You stare at him. He takes that as permission and ducks inside, immediately assessing your room like a thief casing a particularly disappointing house. Still smell like regret and animal fat? He notes, sniffing the air approvingly. You consider kicking him out, but he's already unpacking. The dog wags at him like they've conspired. You sit down. You sigh. You light a candle. Historians still debate whether bards were truly welcome in every Viking village, or simply tolerated because no one wanted to be immortalized in a mocking verse. You suspect the latter. The bard pulls out his lute and begins tuning. It's not bad, but it's not great either. The kind of music that makes your ears twitch involuntarily. Then comes the knock. You brace for another bard. But it's not. It's a woman. Tall, broad, shouldered, hair braided with bone beads. You recognize her from last spring's goat chase. She tackled the beast better than most warriors tackle glory. I need candles, she says. You nod. That's normal. For a funeral, she adds. My husband. You glance past her shoulder where a sled waits, covered in furs. I'm sorry, you say? She shrugs. You wasn't great. You offer her a small candle and a large one, both from your quiet flames series, subtle in glow and burn time. She examines them like she's choosing between axes. These'll do, she says. Then she adds, got a son? Grown now? Thought I'd move back here. Quiet village. Less stabbing. You nod again. She doesn't leave. Nice dog, she says, eyeing Bundle. You realize she's assessing your living situation. The fire, the spare stool, the walls that barely hold up. She doesn't say anything else. Just leaves with the candles. The bard strums a love song immediately after. You throw a spoon at him. He dodges with flair. Later that evening, as the snow begins to whisper down again, you find yourself watching the flame on one of your newer candles. It leans slightly, like it's listening. Bundle curls up by your feet. The bard snores on your bedroll. You're stuck in your own home with a lute and a dog and the possible future presence of a Viking widow. You didn't sign up for this. You were promised solitude, predictability, and maybe a quiet death surrounded by wax. Instead, you're suddenly living in a sitcom with fur cloaks and emotional baggage. Quirky fact, some sagas mention winter households, where unrelated villagers would ride out the cold months together. Chosen family, temporary alliances. Most fell apart by spring. Some didn't. You finish your stew slowly. It tastes better with a dog nearby. Or maybe just warmer. You light another candle. This one has a slightly tilted wick and a wax swirl on one side. You name it, company, and you smile. Just a little. The day starts with a sneeze. Yours and an answering bark from Bundle, who seems to think sneezing is some kind of war cry. The bard groans from his corner, wrapped in every spare cloth in your home and still complaining about the unforgiving draft of destiny. You ignore them both. There's candle work to be done. You ease into it. This batch is for temple use again. Standard size, clean lines, burn stable, nothing ambitious. Just solid, honest flame. You find that your hands move more easily when the house is full, even if it's filled with human-shaped distractions and a dog that sheds like a particularly determined sheep. Around midday, you hear footsteps outside, a soft tread, deliberate. It's her, the widow. She ducks her head through the door and surveys the scene. You hunched over tallow, Bundle chewing something that might be a spoon, the bard softly humming a saga to his own toes. Lucy, she asks. You look up? No. Good. Walk with me. You're already pulling on your boots. You don't ask where you're going. That would be too forward, too modern. You just follow as she leads you down a path that skirts the edge of the frozen creek, through thin woods where the snow crunches just right and the wind doesn't quite reach. After a while, she stops, turns to you, says, Did you ever almost marry? You blink. Once. You admit. Sort of. She left for a place with bees. The widow grunts. Better than my story. Mine died. Not dramatically. Just fell into a vat of curdled milk. No one wrote a saga about it. You try not to laugh. You mostly fail. She smiles. It's small, but it's real. You walk a little further. She tells you about her son. Now a hunter, living in another village, sends her dried meat and letters carved into bark. She misses him, but not in a way that aches. More like a tooth she once lost that sometimes itches out of memory. Thought about remarrying. You ask, surprising yourself. She shrugs. Thought about dying alone. Either way, someone gets my boots. You return to your home just before dusk. She helps you unload firewood from her sled without being asked. Then she stays for stew. Then she stays longer. The bard observes this with theatrical interest, plucking heartstrings, both metaphorical and actual, on his lute. Love is a candle, he says grandly, flickering at the edge of reason. You throw a ladle at him. He catches it. Barely. Later that night, when the widow finally heads to her own house, she pauses at the door, looks back. I liked your last batch, she says. They burn soft. Good for thinking. You nod. That was the intention. She doesn't say goodnight. Just leaves. You sit back down, staring at the small flame between you and the bard. It dances like it knows something you don't. Historians still argue how common romance was among Viking villagers, not bound by alliance or dowry. Some believe it was rare, even scandalous. Others say it was quietly accepted, especially during the long winters, when companionship mattered more than coin. You watch the candle flicker, then you carve a small heart into a leftover stump of wax. It feels childish. Then it feels brave. Bundle yawns. The bard hums something sleepy, and for once, not tragic. You lean back, and for the first time in a long time, you wonder what it would be like to fall asleep beside someone who doesn't mind the smell of whale fat. Quirky fact, some Viking wedding rituals involved jumping over a broomstick, sharing all, and lighting a pair of candles meant to merge their wax as a symbol of shared fate. You light two tonight, just to test the theory. They don't merge, but they burn quietly, side by side. The wind shifts sometime in the early morning, sneaking through every crack in your house with the sly persistence of a thief who wants to borrow your toes. You wake up shivering, even though you're under two furs and what might be the bard's discarded cloak. You shove it off immediately. It smells like pickled storytelling. Bundle is curled into a tight ball near the hearth, radiating smug warmth. The bard, still half asleep, is muttering a saga to himself about a great hero who battled frostbite with nothing but wit and questionable footwear. You light a candle, more out of principle than need. The flame sputters at first, then steadies. It casts a warm circle of light that almost makes your cold breath seem poetic. Today, winter officially arrives, not in the calendar sense, but in the snow is now a constant roommate sense. There's a quietness in the air, a blanket of silence that mutes the village to the hum of footsteps and the occasional goat-based emergency. Your first task: candles for the Jarl's winter store. He wants long burners, steady wicks, no frills. You complain, though you slip a tiny spiral into each one. Just a secret signature. Something to remind them that someone made these with intention, not just utility. Your fingers crack from the cold. The tallow is slow to melt. You work with gloves on, which feels like carving runes with mittens. But you manage. The bard offers to help. You hand him a wick, and he immediately tangles it into something resembling a tiny, confused octopus. You send him outside to gather wood instead. He returns 30 minutes later with exactly one log and a song about how it's symbolic. The widow stops by around midday. She brings you a smoked fish, wrapped in waxed linen. You'll want this later, she says, which is Viking for, I'm thinking about you at dinner. She doesn't stay long, but you catch her glancing at your bench, the one opposite yours, near the candlelight. You light a second one before she leaves. She notices. Bundle watches this exchange with the alertness of a creature who's seen entire relationships form over a shared bowl of soup. Later, you go out to gather snow for water, trudging through drifts that reach your knees. The landscape is all white hush, dotted with thatched roofs and plumes of smoke. You pass the well, frozen over. Someone's left a fish carved from ice on the edge. An offering or a joke. Hard to tell. You return home and spend the evening testing candles. One flares too fast. Another burns with a sad lean. You keep the best, break the rest, and toss their fragments into the fire. Bundle watches every move like a disapproving supervisor. Historians still argue whether Viking households were strictly utilitarian in the winter months, or if the long dark encouraged a kind of makeshift intimacy. Story circles, shared warmth, spontaneous singing. Your home seems to be testing all three. After dinner, a fish, as predicted. The bard announces that tomorrow he will leave, to seek glory. He says dramatically, maybe a bath? You nod half listening. You've heard this before. He'll stay another week, maybe two. But it feels like a turning point. The air is shifting again, colder, tighter, like a drumskin stretched over snow. You light 3 candles now, just to keep the room feeling wider. One for the hearth, one for the workbench, and one for no reason at all. You find yourself watching the wax melt, not because it's fascinating, but because it's consistent, predictable, warm. Quirky fact in Old Norse superstition, the first candle lit after the winter solstice was meant to carry intentions through the rest of the season. If it burned without incident, your year would be steady. If it sputtered, trouble was coming. Yours burned clean tonight. You carve a tiny rune into the bottom of the jarl's largest candle, not for magic, just because. Outside, snow stacks higher on the windowsill. The wind hums a little deeper. Inside, you share silence with a dog, a bard, and the faint memory of something like romance. You aren't lonely. Not really, just wintered in. The flame wavers once, then holds steady. The fire doesn't want to light this morning. You sit beside the hearth, coaxing it with dry moss and mumbled insults, while Bundle watches you from his usual spot, eyes half lidded in judgmental serenity. The bard is gone, actually gone this time. He left before dawn, leaving behind a slightly tuneless thank. You song carved into a plank and a single, overly dramatic feather. Your home feels larger without him, and somehow, slightly quieter than it did before he arrived. It's not unwelcome, but it's noticeable. You finally get the fire going. The warmth creeps slowly back into the room, pressing against the frozen corners and chasing away. The kind of chill that gets behind your bones. You light your best candle, the one you've been saving. It's tall, smooth, and balanced. You've been calling it one last flame. You set it at the center of your table. It ignites on the first try. Today, you don't have orders, no temple rituals, no festivals, no morning requests or panicked traders in need of romantic lighting. Just you, a room full of half-used tools, and winter tapping gently at the walls. You decide to make just one more candle. Not because you need it, but because it feels like the right thing to do. You pick your favorite mold, the one shaped by years of trial and error. You mix the tallow slowly, stirring as the wax thickens with a soft gurgle that reminds you of rainy days and quiet thoughts. The wick is perfect, woven tight, trimmed clean. It dips smoothly. You hum a little as you work, not because you mean to, but because you forgot to be quiet. You finish the candle and set it next to one last flame. It's smaller but proud. You think maybe it'll be the first one you light in spring. The widow visits in the afternoon. She doesn't knock, just enters with snow in her hair and a faint smile on her face. She brings pickled onions and a blanket she claims was once her brother's, but now belongs to anyone who doesn't complain too loudly. She sits across from you. You pour warm broth. You say very little. Outside, the sky is the soft color of ash. Inside, the candles burn quietly, their light pooling like calm water. The widow watches the flames for a long while. You ever think you'd be here? She asks. You shake your head. I thought I'd be anywhere but... She grins. Same? Historians still argue about what the end of a Viking tradesperson's life looked like. Did they retire? Move south, join a ship, and vanish into legend? Some believe they simply faded quietly into their village, becoming part of its routine, until they were indistinguishable from it. You feel that? You tell the widow about the message stick from your cousin. She listens carefully, nods once. Write him back, she says. I will. You both know you might not. The evening comes slowly, curling around the edges of your home like smoke. The fire crackles, the stew thickens, the dog snores, and in the warm glow of candlelight, the silence you once feared now feels like a blanket. Quirky fact, the Norse believed the soul could travel by light. A candle left burning on the longest night might guide ancestors home, or show the way forward through unknown paths. You look at one last flame. It burns clean, steady, golden. You lean back, hands wrapped around your mug, and listen to the quiet rhythm of your own breath. You are not famous. You will not be sung about. No sagas will chant your name in mead halls, but you made light in the dark. You gave warmth where there was none. You softened the winter with a whisper of fire. And really, isn't that all anyone ever hopes for? The candle burns lower now. The flames dance slower, the wax pooling gently like the last thoughts of the day. Outside, the snow falls in a hush so complete, it seems the world itself has curled up to rest. You sit, wrapped in warmth, the kind that's not just heat but history. Layers of wax and wood smoke and quiet repetition. The dog at your feet sighs in his sleep. The blanket draped over your shoulders carries the scent of fur and faint pine. Your eyes drift to the window, where frost etches soft patterns like runes from some forgotten dream. You trace them without moving, following invisible lines between memory and possibility. Tomorrow the candles will be made again. The fire will need coaxing again. The sky will stay gray. The goats will still escape. But tonight there is peace. The room is still, the silence gentle. You feel the weight of your solitude, not as a burden, but as a shape, something earned. And within it, a tiny flicker of connection. Through wax and flame, and one small life lived with quiet care. The last flame trembles slightly, then steadies. You close your eyes, let the wind drift by. Let the candle burn a little longer. Let sleep take you like snowfall, soft, silent.